Santa Claus Myths, Legends, and History. Written by KIV Books. Narrated by Andrew Baldwin. Disclaimer. This book is designed to provide condensed information. It is not intended to reprint all the information that is otherwise available, but instead to complement, amplify, and supplement other texts. You are urged to read all the available material, learn as much as possible, and tailor the information to your individual needs. Every effort has been made to make this book as complete and as accurate as possible. However, there may be mistakes, both typographical and in content. Therefore, this text should be used only as a general guide and not as the ultimate source of information. The purpose of this book is to educate. The author or the publisher shall have neither liability nor responsibility to any person or entity regarding any loss or damage caused, or alleged to have been caused, directly or indirectly, by the information contained in this book. Enjoy! Introduction. Do you love Santa Claus? If you're like most people, you probably do, because Santa Claus is the face of Christmas for many of us. Have you ever wondered how Santa Claus came to be? Would you like to know more about Santa Claus? If so, then keep reading, because this is the book for you. Christmas is arguably the most popular and loved holiday. It is often a time of reunion for many families, a time to relive old memories and create new ones. Yet, as the culture around the holiday changes, the legend of Santa Claus is the one thing that has remained constant. There is no doubt that Santa Claus is the face of Christmas. With a thick white beard and a red and white suit, the man riding a sleigh pulled by reindeers has become the embodiment of the Christmas spirit. Yet, how he came to be is a mystery to many. If you have always asked yourself the following questions: who is Santa Claus? How did Santa Claus come to be? What is the history behind Santa Claus? From where did the legend of Santa Claus come? And many more? Keep reading. This book will cover the myths and legends surrounding Santa Claus, the origins of Santa Claus as Father Christmas, how Santa Claus has evolved over the years, and so much, much more. With that in mind, let's get started with this fun, fascinating journey into Father Christmas's life. The origins of Christmas. All the world is happy when Santa Claus comes. Maud Lindsay. The Christmas holidays are often a time to be happy. The holiday, celebrated on December 25th each year, is one of the world's most loved times of the year. Christmas is often the biggest day of the year for most people, even bigger than their birthdays. And yet, how Christmas came to is a mystery for most people. In this chapter, we shall look at the origins of Christmas before looking at how Santa came to be, because without Christmas, there would be no Santa. Origins of Christmas. The Christmas holiday is a sacred religious holiday where Christians celebrate the anniversary of the birth of Jesus Christ of Nazareth. The name directly translates to the Mass on Christ's Day. Many people celebrate the holiday by exchanging gifts, sharing meals with family and friends, decorating their homes with Christmas trees and lights. Many others look forward to waiting for Santa Claus to arrive and deliver gifts, something often believed to happen deep in the night of Christmas Eve. In the United States, Christmas has been a federal holiday since 1870. But how did it start? Well, Christmas has no single origin, with the holiday linked to various influences in many communities the world over, especially those that experienced winter. For countries that experience winter, the middle of winter has been a period of celebration for a long time. Indeed, for centuries before the arrival of a man called Jesus, Europeans held a feast to celebrate the winter solstice, which was a celebration of light and birth in the darkest days of winter. The term of the holiday was Yule, a word derived from the Germanic word jol. The holiday, which started in Scandinavia, was celebrated from December 21st to January. The terms used in other languages were Navidad in Spanish. Does the name ring a bell? It sure does, because of the Christmas carol Feliz Navidad, Natale in Italian, and Noël in French. To celebrate the return of the sun, Norsemen, an ancient North Germanic ethnic group who were ancestors to modern-day Scandinavians, would come home with large logs. They would then set them alight and have the community celebrate around the logs until they all burnt to ashes, which would take as many as 12 days. The Norse believed that each spark from the flame represented a new pig or calf born in the coming year. In Germany, people honored a pagan god called Odin during this period. The community was terrified of Odin because they believed that he made flights late in the night to observe his people, choosing who would prosper and who would perish. Thus, they celebrated Odin to improve their chances of being chosen to prosper. Additionally, during this period, many people would stay indoors to avoid Odin's presence. Meanwhile, Rome also influenced Christmas. Although Rome did not have harsh winters as the far north, they celebrated the Saturnalia holiday to honor their god of agriculture, Saturn. They would start the celebrations in the weeks leading up to the winter solstice, which begins around December 21st, and celebrate for one whole month. It was an indulgent celebration, full of earthly pleasures, with food and drinks served in plenty. During this time, even the slave masters granted their slaves temporary freedom and treated them as equals, only to some degree. Schools and businesses closed so that everyone would be present and participate in the celebrations of a bountiful harvest in the summer. Additionally, the Roman Empire celebrated the rebirth of the sun, Mithra, who was the god of the sun. The date of the celebration was December 25th. However, early Christian communities sought to distinguish the date of the birth of Jesus and the celebration of the winter solstice. Indeed, Christianity had strongly opposed celebrating the holidays of martyrs, Jesus being one of them. However, in the 4th century, church officials decided to add Jesus' birthday to the Easter celebrations, which were the main Christian holiday back then. The Bible itself provides clues that December may not have been the time of Jesus' birth. As mentioned, shepherds were herding on the night of Jesus' birth, which is not possible in winter. However, Pope Julius, who instituted the holiday, chose December 25th. The prevailing consensus is that the purpose of doing this was to adapt to existing traditions of the pagan Saturnalia festivities and ensure the masses embraced the holiday. The holiday was first called the Feast of the Nativity. Its celebration customs soon began spreading worldwide, landing at the shores of Egypt by 432 and in England at the end of the 6th century. Soon, Christianity surpassed paganism as the dominant religious vehicle, which further improved the popularity of the celebration of the birth of Christ. The celebrations involved attending church, then celebrating their hearts out in a drunken carnival atmosphere. The rich invited the poor into their homes for food and drink. Thus began the tradition of the rich giving back to the poor. It was a way for the rich to pay their debt to society. Cancellation of Christmas. It has not always been smooth sailing for Christmas. Religious reforms swept across Europe in the 17th century, changing Christmas celebrations in their wake. Riding on support from his Puritan forces, Oliver Cromwell, a military leader in England, took over power in 1645. Together, they got rid of decadence in England, and with it went Christmas. However, his death in 1658 saw the popular Charles II ascend to the throne, and with his reign, Christmas returned. America did not embrace Christmas until the 19th century, and soon introduced their tradition to the holiday. It became a family-centered holiday instead of the carnival of old. At that time, turmoil and class conflict plagued America, and so Christmas became a holiday that brought together people of different social statuses. The new traditions and how Americans celebrated Christmas is what we now associate with the holiday. Christmas trees and decorations, gift giving and sending holiday cards, and of course, the popularization of Santa Claus were all part of American reinvention of the holiday. Speaking of Santa Claus, the history of Santa Claus. God put Santa Claus on Earth to remind us Christmas is supposed to be a happy time. Bill Keene. To be clear, America did not invent Santa Claus. All it did was popularize the concept to the world. Instead, the legend of Santa Claus traces back to a monk called Saint Nicholas, a Turkey-born cleric living around 280 AD. It is no coincidence that Santa Claus's name is Saint Nicholas, sometimes called Kris Kringle. Santa Claus has become so steeped in the tradition of Christmas that it no longer makes sense to imagine a Christmas holiday without him. Saint Nicholas. Saint Nicholas was born in Greece around the 230 to 280 AD period in the late 3rd century. He was born in a small town called Patara, near Myra, which is in modern-day Turkey. From an early age, many knew Nicholas for his kindness and piety. Later in his life, he became the bishop of the town of Myra and gained prominence among other saints as he was associated with working miracles. His star grew, and he became known as a defender of the church during the Great Persecution of 303. The Great Persecution was a dark time for Christianity, and many priests the world over were forced to renounce Christianity and burn the Bible. Failure to do this would result in their execution. Additionally, St. Nicholas was known as someone who protected the less privileged in society. He protected orphans, prisoners, sailors, and other underprivileged classes of people. Indeed, his reputation often connects to 2 stories of his life, stories that spoke of his nature as a patron for children. The first story is about how he helped 3 sisters avoid being sold into slavery in the mid-4th century. As the story goes, the 3 little girls and their father had been in a difficult financial situation for some time. With nowhere else to turn, the girls were about to get forced and sold into prostitution. However, St. Nicholas came to their rescue by secretly slipping 3 bags of gold bars into their house. As the story has it, the gold bars served as dowry for the girls, which allowed them to get married. The second story is about 3 young boys killed by an innkeeper. According to the legend, St. Nicholas, known for working miracles, resurrected them. These stories and many more were passed down for generations, making St. Nicholas the undisputed bringer of joy to children on the night of Christmas. His qualities had a close link to the gods of earlier European communities. For example, like the Roman god Saturn brought harvest, St. Nicholas brought joy and gifts. He also was like the Norse god Odin, who passed over homes on Christmas to ensure that children practice good behavior, with those practicing good behavior getting Christmas gifts. These stories served to amplify St. Nicholas's already considerable reputation, and soon he got to have his day, on December 6th. The day was a day to feast in commemoration of St. Nicholas, and was considered the best day to make large purchases and get married. When the Renaissance period came around, he was one of the most popular saints across Greater Europe. The Protestant Reformation in the 16th century threatened the popularity of St. Nicholas. Indeed, many thought it would end the celebration of the saint. The Protestant Reformation was a religious, cultural, intellectual, and political upheaval that broke the Catholic Church. Many who broke away questioned the Catholic Church's ability to be the single authority of Christian practice. They called for religious and political redistribution of power. This upheaval discouraged the veneration of saints. However, St. Nicholas had already gained a reputation that had surpassed his position as a saint, especially in the Netherlands, the birthplace of his modern name. Sinterklaas, the Dutch influence on Santa Claus. The Dutch embraced St. Nicholas to such an extent that he became an important figure on his own, away from the Christmas celebrations that surround him today. Sinterklaas, a shorthand for Sint Nicolaas, or Dutch for St. Nicholas, was celebrated on December 6th. Gift-giving, meanwhile, was on St. Nicholas Eve, December 5th, in the Netherlands. The Dutch depicted Sinterklaas as an elderly, serious man with long white hair and a long, full white beard. He wore a long red cape over the traditional white bishop alb, sometimes had a red stole, the scarf that priests wear that often has crosses on it, and held a long ceremonial shepherd's staff that had a long, fancy curled top. The staff is called a crozier. The Sinterklaas has traditionally ridden a white horse called Amerigo. Amerigo died in 2019 and was replaced by one called O zo snel, translated to Oh So Fast. Sinterklaas carried around a big red book in which he recorded children's good and naughty deeds over the past year. The Black Piet. The Sinterklaas had an assistant or helper called the Zwarte Piet, translated to Black Pete. Black Pete dressed in colorful attires and was in a blackface. Black Pete first became part of the Sinterklaas movement when he appeared in print in 1850. He was an unnamed servant to St. Nicholas in a book called Sint Nicolaas en zijn knecht, translated Saint Nicholas and his servant, published by a school teacher in Amsterdam, Jan Schenkman, in 1850. Many believe that the 1850 publication was to be the first time the helper had appeared in print. However, it is believed the tradition of Sinterklaas having a helper dated further back into the 19th century. Zwarte Piet often dressed up in colorful attires, and the most probable influence of what we now know today as elves. Zwarte Piet's dress was based on a noble attire worn by 16th century noblemen called the Moors. The Moors were people with dark skin of mixed Arab, Spanish, and Berber origins. They were the ones who created the Islamic Andalusian civilization. They settled in the Maghreb, which is what we now know as North Africa. The clothing for Piet features a ruff, which is a lace collar and a featured cap. Many traditional texts often depicted him carrying a bag that contained the candy given to children. This tradition was based on the famous story of St. Nicholas saving the 3 girls from prostitution by tossing gold coins through their house windows, coins later used to pay their dowry. Zwarte Piet also carried around a birch rod, a broom meant for sweeping chimneys, called ro in Dutch. The rod was used to spank children who had been naughty. But that was not all, because the story gets darker. The Dutch believed that Piet would spank the children and carry away some children in his bag and take them back to Spain. The Moors, who influenced Zwarte Piet's formation, had raided the European coast and abducted people into slavery. These stories were often told in songs and were used to scare children to behave better. Other cultures replaced Zwarte Piet with other creatures who accompanied St. Nicholas. There was Krampus, who was part of the Alpine Christmas folklore. Alpine countries include France, Germany, Austria, Switzerland, Slovenia, and Liechtenstein. The Krampus is a horned creature who has become just as well known in Christmas folklore as St. Nicholas, even making appearances in Hollywood Christmas horror movies. Then, the French also had Pied Fouettard, also called the Father Whipper or the Old Man Whipper. Like Krampus and Zwarte Piet, Pied Fouettard accompanied St. Nicholas on his rounds during St. Nicholas Day. Fouettard did not just beat naughty children, however. He would also dispense lumps of coal rather than candy as part of the punishment for the children being naughty. All the while, St. Nicholas gave gifts to those well-behaved. Pied Fouettard is often depicted as a man with a scary face, wearing dark robes and having unkempt hair and a long, scraggly beard. He walked with a whip, a large stick, and a bundle of switches. Unlike Krampus and Zwarte Piet, however, Fouettard has not gained worldwide fame, or infamy for this matter. He remains deeply tied to the tradition of the communities from which he originated, French-speaking communities. Piet's evolution. Zwarte Piet, however, has transformed throughout the years, and in the modern-day world, no longer carries around a rod for beating children. He also no longer stuffs children into his bag for transportation to Spain. Indeed, the modern depiction of Zwarte Piet has taken him from a scary, unintelligent helper into a more valuable assistant, often being a valuable reminder to the forgetful and absent-minded Sinterklaas. Furthermore, in the modern depiction of Sinterklaas in Dutch, Zwarte Piet is no longer a single helper, he is a team of them. There is now a Zwarte Piet for every function that Sinterklaas needs. There's the head Piet, or Hoofdpiet, who oversees the other Piets, to a navigation Piet called Wegwijspiet in Dutch, who is responsible for navigating Sinterklaas's steamboat. The Dutch believe that Sinterklaas came from Spain on a steamboat, disembarking at around mid-November. To presents Piet, or Pagjispiet, who wraps all gifts, to an acrobatic Piet, capable of climbing roofs and sliding down chimneys to deliver gifts to children. While Zwarte Piet's face was traditionally black because he was a Moor from Andalusia in Spain, modern folklore tells children that his face is black because of all the soot sediment he came into contact with from sliding down chimneys. Modern Zwarte Piet. In the Netherlands, the tradition around Zwarte Piet has become a subject of controversy and conversation. With the world coming around to the reality of the racism that black people face, there were questions raised on the use of blackface for Zwarte Piet. From the 2010s, editorials, debates, protests, and documentaries have all been part of the St. Nicholas Day in the Netherlands, as conversations around the blackface of Zwarte Piet grew. The process has been long. In 2013, most Dutch people, about 92% according to a 2013 survey, did not perceive the blackface on Zwarte Piet as racist, while 91% were against altering the character's appearance. However, a similar survey in 2018 showed a drop in support of blackface Zwarte Piet. Then, between 80 to 88% of Dutch people saw Zwarte Piet's blackface depiction as racist, with up to 54% being okay with the modernization of the character. A June 2020 survey revealed that support for Zwarte Piet's traditional appearance had hit an all-time low. Only 47% of the Dutch people supported Zwarte Piet's traditional appearance, a figure well below 71% in 2019. The 2020 survey showed a change in perception, and also came in the heat of the Black Lives Matter movement following the murder of George Floyd by a police officer Derek Chauvin in May. The movement brought to the fore conversations about racism in ways not previously seen in recent times. On June 5, 2020, Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte stated in Parliament that he had changed his view on the blackface issue and now understood why the depiction of Zwarte Piet was racist. Since then, many cities and television channels in the Netherlands no longer depict Zwarte Piet as blackface. Instead, they display the characters as having some soot smudges on their faces. That has led to the rise of the Roetvepieten, translated to soot smudge Piets, or Schoorsteenpieten, translated to chimney Piets. Before we proceed, let us briefly look at why black people consider blackface racist. Why is blackface considered racist? Blackface is when a white person wears black paint on their face to depict a black person. The practice started over 200 years ago as white people used blackface to mock enslaved Africans. They went around doing shows called minstrel shows where they depicted the enslaved Africans in offensive caricatures. The shows depicted black people as lazy, ignorant, cowardly, and barbaric beings who could not control their primal instincts. Additionally, the people performing blackface did not just paint their faces black, they exaggerated the features of the Africans, showing them as having very large lips, extremely wide eyes, and wearing tatters. These were demeaning and hurtful to the African community. The build-up to Sinterklaas Day. Family ties. In the weeks after his arrival, and before December 5th, Sinterklaas visited hospitals, schools, and shopping centers in a humanitarian visit. Later on, he would ride his white horse over the rooftops at night, delivering gifts to well-behaved children. To ensure they got their presents, children would often put their shoes close to the fireplace. They would also place the shoe with a carrot and some hay in it and a bowl of water close by, which they believed Sinterklaas's horse would drink. They would then sing a Sinterklaas song, after which they would wait for Sinterklaas. Typically, the Dutch believed that Sinterklaas loved mandarin oranges, pepernoot, a cookie-like confectionery, speculoos, a type of spiced biscuit, chocolate coins, and chocolate letters, chocolate made out of the first letter of the child's first name. Modern treats include gingerbread biscuits or a Sinterklaas figurine made from chocolate wrapped in a colored aluminum foil. Now, on the evening of December 5th, many parents, friends, or other family members would get down to work and act as the Sinterklaas or his helpers, Piets. They would work in the absence of the children when they were sleeping or away at a relative's place. They would then take the treats the children had put close to the fireplace and replace them with gifts. The parents and friends would find notes that detailed where the child's present was hidden, giving the child the impression that Santa had visited and that Zwarte Piet had left their presents for them. Some parents would deck out the living room with presents as the children were sleeping. Other times, the parents would have a neighbor knock on the door and pretend to be a Zwarte Piet. They would knock, leave the sack of presents at the door, and leave. Then, come the morning of December 6th, the children would open their gifts as Sinterklaas departed, marking the end of the festivities. In Belgium, the practice was largely the same. However, besides the gifts, they would also leave behind a bottle of beer for the Zwarte Piet and a cup of coffee for Sinterklaas. Sinterklaas in New York, the beginning of the modern-day legend. The real Santa Claus is at the mall. Lemony Snicket. Until this point, the Dutch viewed Santa as a figure in his element, celebrated as a person, with his day separate from Christmas. However, as mentioned earlier, the Americans put their twist to Christmas, and it would be the same with Santa Claus. Sinterklaas first made his way into the American way of life at the end of the 18th century. In December 1773, and later in 1774, a New York paper had reported that groups of Dutch families would gather to honor the anniversary of Sinterklaas's death. Dutch and German settlers in the Americas took with them the idea of Sinterklaas, but portrayed him as a newer version. This new version of Sinterklaas was a jolly old man with a big belly who traveled from the North Pole to deliver gifts to children. In this version, he used a sleigh pulled by 8 reindeers. However, they still celebrated him on December 6th, with the tradition of giving children sweets and gifts holding up. Up until this point, Sinterklaas had been strictly a person grounded in some realism. He rode a steamboat and had helpers. However, the modern mythology surrounding the figure would gain much traction as Sinterklaas, who later evolved to Santa Claus, swept through the American public. The American influence. At the time of Santa Claus's introduction to American society, the Christmas holiday was not yet the modern depiction of a family-based time of merry. In many U.S. states, the holiday was an outdoor, alcohol-fueled, rowdy celebration similar to how the pagans had celebrated the Saturnalia holiday. There was no magical element to it, no gift bringer, no special family reunions. Indeed, New England had completely shunned the holiday. However, in the early 19th century, the winds of change began to sweep across the American public, changing public perception of Christmas. Thanks to poets and writers who strove to make Christmas a family holiday in a revival of the spirit that St. Nicholas had evoked during his time in the 4th century. The first of these books was by Washington Irving in 1809. In his book, Knickerbocker's History of New York, the writer portrayed St. Nicholas as a pipe-smoking man who soared above rooftops in a flying wagon, delivering gifts to good children while giving switches to the bad ones. Further forward, in 1821, an anonymous letter titled The Children's Friend added detail to the growing reshaping of Sinterklaas. The poem is believed to have been the first that shaped the modern-day Santa Claus and associated him with Christmas. Historian and author Jerry Bowler said that the poem stripped St. Nicholas of any religious characteristics and instead dressed him in the furs of the Germanic gift-bringers. As usual, this new Santa carried gifts to children, but also had a birch rod that he would use to direct a parent to guide their child towards virtue. The poem put it that the birch rod, quote, directs a parent's hand to use when virtue's path his sons refuse. Santa had a thin wagon and only one reindeer in this version, but that would change come 1822. Clement Clark Moore, an American scholar and prominent poet, wrote a poem, A Visit from St. Nicholas, better known today as The Night Before Christmas, for his 6 children. However, his intentions were not to add to the growing Santa Claus movement taking over much of the United States. His was an innocent poem to his children. However, the poem was published anonymously in 1823. The poem describes St. Nicholas as a plump, jolly man who rode a sleigh driven by 8 reindeers. However, the poem still left much to the imagination regarding the clothes he wore and his size. Thus, in much of the 19th century, Santa Claus appeared in clothes of different colors and was either a miniature or a very massive figure. He also wore various disguises. According to Jerry Bowler, there's even a picture of him looking exactly like America's first president, George Washington. Around the same time, America began commercializing Christmas, with stores starting to advertise Christmas shopping in the 1820s. By the time the 1840s came around, newspapers had entire sections for Christmas holiday advertisements. These adverts featured the image of Santa, who was now fast gaining popularity. Then, in 1841, thousands of children got the opportunity to visit a Philadelphia store and saw a life-size Santa Claus model. That was the first depiction of Santa Claus at the mall that we know of today. The stores and the Santa model success prompted other stores to begin putting Santa Claus models outside their stores to attract children and parents. Santa Claus up north. However, Santa didn't stop evolving. Indeed, the depiction of Santa Claus today was based on the drawing of a cartoonist Thomas Nast, who who was a political cartoonist for the Harper's Weekly paper. Nast based his drawing on Moore's poem, A Visit from St. Nicholas. The drawing appeared first on the paper in the late 1800s. Nast created the depiction of Santa as a jolly and chubby grandfather figure with a full beard, carrying a sack of gifts on his back. Nast was also the one who gave Santa his bright red suit with fur trims on the edges. He also stated that he had his workshop in the North Pole, worked with his elves, influenced by Zwarte Piet, and his wife, Mrs. Claus. However, he drew Santa Claus in what many considered indecent trousers, called long johns. However, this would change over the years. The evolution continued, with Salvation Army Christians getting into the Santa Claus fray in the 1890s. The Salvation Army Church wanted to do some community work, which included buying meals for needy families. Determined to solicit donations from the public, the church began dressing unemployed men in Santa Claus suits, then sending them out to the streets of New York to ask for donations. Father Christmas. Other communities know Santa Claus as Father Christmas. However, Father Christmas appeared much earlier than Santa Claus. Father Christmas is a traditional English personification of Christmas that was part of an older but unrelated English folklore. As with Santa Claus, Father Christmas was a well-known gift bringer, and his association with Christmas was intentional from the start. It's even right there in his name. His origin traces back to the 15th century, where the English sought to personify the Christmas holiday. However, they did not create the Father Christmas persona until in the mid-17th century, following the English Civil War. However, as mentioned earlier, a Puritan English government banned Christmas in the 1600s, calling it Papist, a derogatory term used to refer to Roman Catholicism, slowing Father Christmas's journey. Even so, on the down low, royalist pamphleteers, people who distributed pamphlets for wide circulation, stuck with the Christmas cause, adopting an old Father Christmas as the symbol of the good old days of feasting and cheering. Indeed, one of these pamphlets, titled The Arraignment, Conviction, and Imprisoning of Christmas, published in 1646, described a discussion between a royalist gentlewoman and a town crier. The royalist gentlewoman was inquiring from the town crier of where old Father Christmas had gone. The pamphlet described Father Christmas disparagingly, terming him as full and fat and dumb. The pamphlet further described him as a drunk, saying, "But since the Catho-like liquor is taken from him, he is much wasted, so that he looks very thin and ill of late." This desire to get rid of Christmas and its traditions and soil Father Christmas's name came from the Puritan belief that the Church of England tolerated practices associated with Roman Catholic, including Christmas. The Puritans were Protestants who broke from the Roman Catholic Church in protestation. The Church developed its practices and sought to purge Catholic practices from the Church of England, Christmas included. Thus, when they assumed power, this was one of their big acts. Father Christmas's profile declined through the 1660s during the Restoration period, when King Charles II returned to England from exile, restoring the Stuart monarchy. However, the figure still maintained relevance through the late 18th and 19th centuries through Christmas folk plays. However, Father Christmas and Christmas enjoyed a revival in the 19th century during the Victorian period. However, the image of Father Christmas at this time had become varied and no longer portrayed as an old man or bearded figure. It was during this time that mythology surrounding Christmas and Father Christmas began to form. In his 1808 poem Marmion, English poet Walter Scott wrote of a lost golden age in England when the period was marked by universal hospitality and charity. He yearned for a more mythical, merry England. In his book, The Book of Christmas, published in 1836, Thomas Harvey further reinforced Scott's view. Harvey described Father Christmas as riding a goat through the city streets and taking time to talk to the families around. Harvey imagined Father Christmas as a white-bearded magician who had a crown and wore a long robe. He traveled with his large family, including his numerous children, who would later become elves in the contemporary world. Then, later on in 1843, one of the best Christmas novels ever written, A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens, cemented its influence on modern-day Christmas. The novel is often credited with reviving the interest in Christmas and shaping the themes surrounding the holiday. Indeed, the ghost of Christmas present image in the book is believed to have shaped the reimagining of Father Christmas. The illustration by John Leach depicted the character as wearing a holly wreath, sitting at a table of food and drink, dressed in a traditional loose fur gown. However, the gown was green, not red. Although the character was not directly attributed to being Father Christmas, it influenced the character's rebirth. The old Father Christmas continued to appear in Christmas folk plays across the 19th century, but his appearance remained varied. Indeed, some of these stories described him as a grotesque old man that wore a large mask, paired with a comic wig and carrying a huge club. However, until the Victorian period, Father Christmas was associated with adult merrymaking and had little to do with gifting children toys. However, the growing Santa Claus myth spread to England in the 1850s and changed all that. Indeed, a popular journal titled Howitt's Journal of Literature and Popular Progress, published in 1848 in London, published an article titled New Year's Eve in Different Countries. The article detailed how Americans celebrated their New Year with the Santa Claus custom, carried over from Dutch influence. This will be the first of many influences of the American Santa on Father Christmas. The other came from returning British visitors and migrants from the U.S. The familiarity they had with Santa Claus landed on the shores of the British Isles and began to influence Father Christmas depictions. The poem A Visit from St. Nicholas, published in a popular journal in England in 1853, also influenced the adoption of some of Santa Claus's characters for Father Christmas. Carl Krinken, or The Christmas Stocking, a novel by American author Susan Warner, also influenced Father Christmas reinvention. In the book, published thrice in London between 1854 and 1855, Santa Claus used the chimney to deliver gifts to children, complete with a sleigh. He left presents on Christmas Eve. Old Father Christmas is also a character in the book, but is separate from Santa Claus. At this point, the English Father Christmas began to take some of Santa Claus's attributes. Indeed, according to the diary of one Barclay Fox, a Christmas party on December 26, 1842, featured effigies of Father Christmas wearing a scarlet coat and cocked hat, bearing gifts all over for the guests. The figure represented the new year, with another haggard and disheveled figure next to him representing the old year. Several years later, in the 1880s, the new customs had taken firm roots, with Father Christmas, just like Santa Claus, developing into a bringer of gifts for children. Christmas also became a more family-oriented holiday in England, with drunk adult merrymaking replaced with family-oriented festivals. In Britain, the first known evidence of a child writing a letter to Santa Claus dates back to 1895. Soon, Father Christmas also began wearing a long, red hooded gown that had trimmed white fur, making him much like Santa Claus in appearance. Over the years, distinctions between Father Christmas and Santa Claus faded. Now, in the world today, Father Christmas and Santa Claus are synonymous. Additionally, after landing in England, America's Santa Claus underwent a kind of reverse migration. He replaced the existing gift bringers in many nations across Europe, including Père Noël of France and the Father Christmas in Great Britain. Santa Claus in pop culture, Coca-Cola and Christmas movies. They err in thinking that Santa Claus enters through the chimney. He enters through the heart. Charles W. Howard. The image of Santa Claus continued to grow and evolve in the United States. Heading into the 20th century, Santa Claus was now depicted as flying from his home in the North Pole on a magic sleigh to deliver gifts to children on Christmas Eve the world over. He rode around with 8 reindeer: Dasher, Prancer, Dancer, Vixen, Comet, Donner, Cupid, and Blitzen. Later, a 9th and the most famous reindeer, Rudolph, whose history we will cover briefly later in the book, joined them. At this point, Santa Claus was now completely a mythological figure. He entered each house through the chimney, which saw Americans hang Christmas socks next to the fireplace, similar to what the Dutch did with shoes. The belief that Santa Claus lived in the North Pole, created by the cartoonist Thomas Nast, had taken hold. Many American children now believed that Santa Claus lived in the North Pole with his family, wife, and children. In some myths, these children are elves. However, other myths do not explicitly state that the elves are his children, only that they're his helpers. Parents and guardians would encourage children to write letters to Santa and detail their good behavior and gift wishes to Santa. Like Sinterklaas before him, Santa Claus kept a list of naughty children and nice children. The list determined who deserved to get gifts on Christmas morning and those who didn't. The parents often invoked the list as a way to ensure the children behaved better. Coca-Cola enters the fray. Through much of the 20th century, the image of Santa Claus was further enhanced, not by poets and religious movements, but by one of the largest corporates in the world, Coca-Cola. While not reimagining or reinventing the character, the Coca-Cola company saw a great marketing opportunity in the Santa Claus character. The company started popularizing the character in areas where the character had not been a thing. Coca-Cola and Santa Claus came together in the 1920s, when the company first began to advertise in American magazines over the festive season. One of these magazines was the Saturday Evening Post. These Coke ads often featured a man dressed as Santa Claus who did not diverge too far away from Thomas Nast's description of the character in the 1800s. The ads often featured Santa outside a large soda fountain. Sometimes the ads would show him visiting some high-profile department stores. This type of advertising stayed until the 1930s, with Christmas, Coca-Cola, and Santa becoming linked intricately as time wore on. In the 1930s, with Coca-Cola taking advantage of the Christmas period to be aggressive in their advertisement, the company commissioned the services of the Darcy Advertising Agency and a Michigan-born artist, Haddam Sundblom. They created a campaign that made Santa Claus more wholesome and approachable. They created a magical aura of the character, which they said was meant to capture the true essence of Santa Claus, something that a man in a Santa costume could not capture. Haddam Sundblom, the artist Coca-Cola commissioned to create Santa's design for the campaign ad, turned to Clemens's The Night Before Christmas for inspiration. He drew the character as the jolly old elf who dressed in red fur and went down chimneys to give children their gifts, further entrenching that version of Santa Claus in the memories of many children. The vivid description in the poem was so compelling that it became hard to dissociate the image of Santa Claus from it, and thus, the Santa in the poem was well on his way to becoming the standard, the one we know today. When working on a character design in the early days, Haddon would have a friend, Lou Prentice, a retired salesman, act as a live model on which he based images of the character. After Lou's passing, Haddon would then use himself as the model, looking at himself in the mirror as he painted. When the advertisement began airing in 1931, it continued airing for 33 years. The advertisement made Santa Claus a more playful character who sometimes played with the toys he delivered to children. He would also often pause to read a letter from a child, all as he took a sip of Coke. Some ads also showed Santa visiting with children who had stayed up to greet him, a far cry from the secretive, mysterious man who only visited homes when children were dead asleep. He also would raid refrigerators in some homes for some Coca-Cola. Called Haddon's Santa, this version of Santa became a regular figure in many American papers and journals, including the Saturday Evening Post, the New Yorker, National Geographic, the Ladies' Home Journal, and many more. Sometime in 1939, Santa Claus would add his most famous reindeer, Rudolph, to his sleigh. Rudolph, known for his red nose, was a creation of Robert L. May, who, at that time, was a copywriter at the Montgomery Ward Department. May had written a Christmas-themed poem meant to bring traffic to his store. In it, May told the story of Rudolph, who became a laughingstock among other deers due to his large, glowing red nose. However, while delivering gifts to children, the Christmas Eve night grew foggy, filling Santa with concern about his capacity to deliver gifts that night. He came across Rudolph, who guided the jolly old man through the night with the glow of his red nose. After that night, Santa Claus adopted him as one of his own. The Montgomery Ward sold close to 2.5 million copies of this story in 1939. A later reissue in 1946 sold over 3.5 million. Years later, a friend of May's, Johnny Marks, wrote a song based on Rudolph's story. The song, recorded by Gene Autry, sold more than 2 million copies. And with that, Rudolph became the ninth and most popular reindeer of the Santa Claus army of sleigh pullers. Coming at a time when TV ownership and viewership were rising sharply, this Coca-Cola Santa Claus connection became so keenly followed that any small changes to the character would result in people sending letters to the company. In one campaign, Santa's belt was backward, which could have resulted from Haddon painting the character from his mirror reflection. Another year, Santa Claus appeared in an ad without his wedding ring, leading many fans to write to Coca-Cola asking what had happened to Mrs. Claus. Haddon would put out his final version of the character in 1964, but all other Santa Claus images that followed remained based on his work with the Coca-Cola Company. Today, the changes to Santa Claus have been very minimal, though several countries have adopted the character to fit their geographical view of him. For example, in Australia, they make Christmas cards where Santa wears board shorts rather than his red suit. However, he still rocks his customary beard. The Coca-Cola Company has also made the image of Santa riding in a Coca-Cola truck a staple. Tracking Santa program. Additionally, there's now a program called NORAD Tracks Santa, a Christmas-themed program that simulates the tracking of Santa Claus. The program is part of a community outreach function created by the North American Aerospace Defense Command, or NORAD, and has been a feature of annual Christmas celebrations since 1955. The program starts on December 1st, but the simulation of tracking Santa often begins on December 23rd. That's the presumed day when Santa leaves his home in the North Pole and travels the world over to deliver presents to children on Christmas Eve. The website often displays predetermined location information to its users, creating the illusion of tracking Santa Claus. Jerry Bowler called the NORAD Track Santa program one of the few modern additions to the centuries-old tales of Santa Claus that have stuck. The history professor at the University of Manitoba says that the program takes an essential element of the Santa Claus tale, traveling to deliver gifts, and looks at it through a technological lens, bringing the Santa Claus story into the modern age. The NORAD Track Santa program is financed by corporate sponsorship. Among them, you guessed it, Coca-Cola. The US or Canadian governments do not fund it. However, the US military and the Canadian Armed Forces have provided the program with publicity during the festive period. Additionally, the program incorporated the help of former US First Lady Michelle Obama in answering calls to the program from 2009 to 2016, further increasing its popularity. All this adds to the further modernization of the mythology of Santa Claus, adding an extra cheer to children and adults alike during the biggest holiday of the year. Movies' influence on Santa Claus. Movies are another influence that has entrenched Santa's image. Christmas movies are among the most popular movies across the world, and in that respect, they have been key in spreading some of the American Christmas traditions to other parts of the world. Santa Claus has seized the spotlight when it comes to Christmas movies, perhaps even taking the light away from Jesus Christ. Films, which pick their influence from the early Coca-Cola ads, often feature Santa Claus wearing a red suit with white fur lining, wearing a white full beard, and often portly. He is almost always Caucasian. The first recorded appearance of Santa Claus in a film was in 1898 in a British short, The Visit of Santa Claus. However, this movie depicted him as a mysterious figure. And although the screens had no color, the clothes he wore were a suit that bore a striking resemblance to the Santa suits of today. He arrived via the chimney and left goodies to 2 sleeping children. Then, The Christmas Dream, released in 1900, had supernatural elements that have influenced modern-day Christmas movies. The film depicted angels falling from the sky through chimneys, with children in the movie waking up to presents at their fireplace. Other movies soon followed. Scrooge Marley's Ghost, released in 1901, and The Night Before Christmas, 1905, based on Clement Clarke Moore's poem. This film also depicted Santa Claus's sleigh as one capable of flight, which would later inspire later Christmas films. There was also A Little Girl Who Did Not Believe in Santa Claus, 1907. in which a girl born into poverty befriends a wealthy boy who helps her believe in Santa Claus after he delivers gifts to her. Then, there was a 1941 film that depicted the killing of Santa Claus. It was among the first films that did not depict just the fun of Santa and Christmas. Called The Killing of Father Christmas, 1941, the Santa in the film was an ordinary village man who acted as Santa Claus for a close-knit community in a French rural town. However, his body is discovered in the snow, leading to a mystery movie. Then there was Miracle on 34th Street, released in 1947, in which, again, Santa was less of a magical figure and more of a person in a suit. The film, however, blended realism with an uplifting fantasy twist at the end, which continued the fantasy of Santa Claus as a magical figure. At this point, the influence of Coca-Cola on Santa Claus's portrayal was getting deeply entrenched. Riding his sleigh soon became flying sleighs, with the reindeers pulling him across. He also sometimes traveled with his elves, whom he tasked with dropping the gifts down the chimney, all of which became features in Christmas movies. The success of each film caused a ripple effect, with newer technologies seeing new filmmakers create more fantastical and magical uplifting Christmas films. There have been more and more Christmas horror stories in recent history, even as the depiction of the holiday and Santa Claus remain overwhelmingly positive. Indeed, the 1974 Canadian horror film Black Christmas is credited as the first film to depict serial killings, more so on Christmas. However, no movie depicted Santa Claus as the killer until 10 years later in Silent Night, Deadly Night. The film tells a story of a boy named Billy, who, after witnessing the killing of his parents by a man dressed as Santa Claus on Christmas Eve, grows up to become a killer who wears the Santa Claus costume. Upon release, the public widely panned the film, especially because it depicted Santa Claus, a jolly old man, as a killer. It got overwhelmingly negative reviews, and the production house pulled it from theaters a week following its release. However, it has gained popularity since then and has spawned several sequels. There are also plans to reboot it in 2022. Another depiction of Santa is as an environmental activist. In the 2008 film The Eco Warrior, played by Pedro Armendariz Jr., takes a stand against global warming. He stands up to a greedy elf entrepreneur whose greedy capitalist ventures lead to ice caps beginning to melt at the North Pole. There have been few deviations of Santa Claus as a white man. However, the 2007 film The Perfect Holiday features a black Santa. The feel-good holiday romance story features Morris Chestnut, who plays a department store Santa who plays the love interest to Gabrielle Union's character, a divorcee. As seen, the depictions of Santa in movies have varied. However, none has been as controversial as the depiction of Santa Claus as a killer. That said, Christmas horror has become a popular genre, with several movies of killer Santa or horror over Christmas released to varying success since Silent Night, Deadly Night in 1984. However, none of these depictions have dented the image of Santa Claus, with the character remaining as popular as ever over the Christmas period. Often, this is because Christmas movies concerned with spreading joy during the festive period often have more success than horror films. They also happen to be more, since many movie studios know they are the most likely to succeed. Because they are so popular worldwide, these movies have spread and maintained the Santa Claus legend across many parts of the world. At this point, many children, from New York in the USA to Nairobi, Kenya, know Santa Claus is nothing but a jolly old man with a full beard and a red suit, delivering gifts on a flying sleigh pulled by reindeers, all while delivering the hearty ho 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 laughter. Secret Santa, returning realism into legend. Of course there's a Santa Claus. It's just that no single person could do all he has to do, so the Lord has spread the task among us all. That is why everybody is Santa Claus. I am. You are. Truman Capote. Today, no Christmas holiday is complete without Santa Claus. The figure began with influences from real traditions in various societies across Europe, but has become nothing but a myth, a legend, make-believe. meant to make children happy during the holidays. With Christmas movies further reinforcing the belief that Santa Claus is a magical being whose sleigh can fly and who can fit through chimneys without a problem despite his size, one would be hard pressed to tell children that Santa is not real. Indeed, realizing that Santa is not real as we grow older is probably one of the most disappointing childhood memories. Growing up and realizing that Christmas is a holiday with no special magical being will often be a hard pill for children to swallow. Fortunately, there has been a committed effort from adults and corporates to keep the spirit of the festive season alive. As mentioned earlier, the Santa Claus tradition in the United States began with someone dressing as the character, all to spread cheer. As mentioned, this drew influence from Sinterklaas, a man in a suit celebrated on December 6th in the Netherlands. While the tradition of people wearing Santa Claus suits and spreading joy over the festive season never died, it sure took a back seat with the popularity of Christmas movies, which spread an uplifting fantasy of Claus as a magical being. Over the recent years, however, there have been concerted efforts to capture the essence of Santa Claus, gift giving through Secret Santa. What is Secret Santa? Secret Santa is a tradition that originated in Western countries, the United States and the United Kingdom mostly, where members of a community get randomly assigned someone to gift over the Christmas period. The purpose of Secret Santa is to capture the essence of Santa Claus, ensuring that learning that Santa was not real would not be too disappointing to many people, more so children. In Secret Santa, the gift giver's identity remains a secret and never revealed, further adding a mystic to the Christmas holiday. Secret Santas are often college students on a break who work in stores where they get to park gifts. Often, the person playing the Secret Santa receives a list of gift ideas and will then choose from the list what to gift to their designated giftee. Once the gifted person gets their gift, they can then guess which group member is their Secret Santa. How did Secret Santa start? Secret Santa is very much all part of the Santa Claus mythos. Just as Santa Claus would give gifts dead in the night, thus you never got to see him, Secret Santa also began with the gift giver remaining anonymous. The tradition traces back to a Scandinavian tradition where, over the festivities, someone would knock on another person's door, then throw a present inside as the occupants opened the door. The gifter would then run away, denying the house occupant a chance to identify them. The Scandinavians called this tradition julklapp, otherwise called knocking Christmas. Others state that the tradition also came from the helpers of St. Nicholas, who gave out presents to children without revealing themselves to them. While Secret Santa is nothing new and is just an iteration to the Santa Claus story, it has allowed for a return to the roots of Santa Claus, who started as a real human being with a desire to help. Now, even as children grow and the fantasy of Santa Claus as a magical being slowly fades, the reality that there are people out there who will gift them offers them a soft landing from the childhood fantasy. How does Secret Santa work? The rules of Secret Santa always have to ensure that the gifter remains anonymous to the giftee. The Secret Santa game is often best done at workplaces, shopping malls, and similar settings where the gifter's identity remains secret. That said, you can still play the game with your family and friends. However, to do that, there are some rules you should follow. Also, note that this party works best when held a few days before Christmas so that everybody gets their gift on time. Also, it's wise to ensure you gift people their gifts before they leave for Christmas vacations. Here are the rules of the Secret Santa game. Number 1, write down everybody's name on a piece of paper. This ensures you all know the participants in the game so that anybody not invited does not sneak in. Number 2, then, everybody should write down a gift suggestion. The players will often write down a specific gift to ensure that everybody gets what they want. Number 3, find the names of the Secret Santa for each player. Often, the names of the people gifting will be in a hat, with the host then picking the names from the hat and assigning the Secret Santa to one player. Number 4, plan a gift exchange get-together. It's best to schedule this exchange before people begin going on their Christmas holidays. Each gift should have a tag showing the recipient's name, but not the name of the Secret Santa. The gifts will then be exchanged, with the host doing the distributing. And number 5, guess the gifter. Once you have your gift, then begins the guessing game. This is part of the tradition, but some people may want to gift one another and get on with their lives. That's okay too. Other Secret Santas. In department stores, the managers will often have someone dressed as Santa sit somewhere prominent inside the store on Christmas Eve and have parents come, buy a gift or gifts, and wrap them in the store beforehand. The gift will bear the child's name. Then, the parent will bring their child to the store and meet Santa Claus, who will then ask them for their name and give them their gifts. While not Secret Santa in the traditional sense, in this instance, each parent is their child's Secret Santa. There are also situations where participants work together to select a gift for one person until everyone in the group gets their gifts. This Secret Santa is great for workplaces and schools, since it allows the participants to learn more about each other. The fun of Secret Santa is that it often allows even adults to take part in the festive cheers. Indeed, there are now websites that offer Secret Santa services: drawnames.co.uk, secretsanta.com, or secretsantaorganizer.com. These sites allow you to organize gift-giving parties where you can become someone else's Secret Santa and have someone else be your Secret Santa. This is only part of the evolution of Santa Claus. Although there are no flying sleighs and a fantastical North Pole workshop, programs such as Secret Santa and the NORAD Santa tracking program help maintain that mystical allure of Christmas. They allow adults and children alike to immerse themselves completely into the beauty of the Christmas period. Admittedly, we can consider Santa Claus a metaphor for being there for others and spreading cheer to those around you. As Truman Capote's quote states, "We are all capable of being Santa Claus." That's where the magic truly is, going out of our ways to be there for another person. Conclusion. The Christmas holidays have evolved into a time to spend with family, as we try to spread cheer and joy to the people around us. St. Nicholas, then, is a perfect person on whom to base the spirit of the holiday. While Christmas is a holiday meant to celebrate the birth of Jesus Christ, there is no doubt that Santa Claus is a more prominent figure during the holiday celebrations now. His white beard, potbelly, and red suit with white fur lining have become synonymous with Christmas. But so has gift-giving and spreading cheer, all of which are part of Santa Claus's journey through the centuries. And it is this desire to spread cheer, spread joy, and be there for another that makes Santa Claus one of the most recognizable and popular figures of our times. To summarize, Santa Claus represents the spirit that Jesus Christ himself embodies: selflessness. And thus, whether real or magical, the one constant thing that Santa Claus teaches us is to be compassionate to everyone and every creature. So, let this be a tribute to Santa Claus, but most importantly, to spreading joy. This has been Santa Claus: Myths, Legends, and History. Written by KIV Books. Narrated by Andrew Baldwin. Copyright 2021 by KIV Books. All rights reserved. Production copyright by KIV Books. The end.